Hello, my name is Scott Kuykendall. I am the superintendent at the Stanislaus County Office of Education. I would like to welcome you to the 2020 American Heritage Scholarship Program. The American Heritage Scholarship Series, in its 19th year, was started in the wake of 9/11 to provide an opportunity for 11th and 12th grade students to gain an understanding of the historical events that shaped our nation and established rights for all Americans to experience freedom. SCOE is pleased to partner with the Modesto Bee, Modesto City Schools, and our community sponsors who are committed to supporting this wonderful program. I would like to acknowledge our American Heritage sponsors. Representing the Modesto Bee is editor Brian Clark, and representing Modesto City Schools is Assistant Superintendent Brad Godot. This is how it works. The American Heritage Committee gathers to identify an engaging prompt that takes advantage of recent or upcoming events, anniversaries, or topics of interest that would allow students to take a stand for or against the issue presented. Participating high school students apply laws, statutes, and the Constitution to form essays supporting their stance. The committee invites a noteworthy speaker, or in this case, speakers, to share research and facts on both sides of the topic in a presentation which is usually live streamed and taped. Due to COVID-19 restrictions, this year's presentation will be pre-recorded and posted on the American Heritage website for review. Students are invited to write and submit essays focusing on the prompt. Since 2020 marks the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment and women's right to vote, the committee drafted the prompt to focus on voting rights. Upon receipt of the essays, a screening will take place. Essay writers must follow the specific requirements or risk disqualification. Now, we don't want anybody to be disqualified. We want you all to be successful, so please follow those specific requirements exactly. We are extremely fortunate to have an illustrious group of local educators, newspaper editors, and community leaders volunteer their time to read and score the initial group of essays and narrow the field down to finalists. Each essay is read a minimum of 2 times. In the final stage of judging, essays are sent to the Stanislaus County Superior Court. The top essays are read, scored, and ranked by 5 to 6 judges of the Stanislaus County Superior Court. Scholarships and awards, so we're talking about money now, scholarships and awards will be distributed based on available funding. Typically, we distribute up to $10,000, covering 19 different scholarships and awards. The top essay writer is awarded $2,000, and there are usually 9 $100 scholarships, with several others in between. Since this program began, we have allocated nearly $180,000 to help students defray their college costs. Our guest speakers tonight are the Honorable Marie Silvera, retired judge from the Stanislaus County Superior Court, and Marianne Cannon, President and CEO of the Stanislaus Community Foundation. Judge Marie Silvera is a retired Superior Court judge for the state of California, County of Stanislaus. She served this county as a judge from January 1998 until July 2020. Judge Silvera has handled all types of cases in the Superior Court, including criminal law, civil law, juvenile and family law cases, from the beginning of a case through the completion of numerous jury trials. She has had many other court duties, including the supervision and mentoring of new judges, as well as 2 terms as the presiding judge of the court. For many years, she worked with high school students who have participated in the mock trial competition sponsored by SCOE and our student events department. Marianne Cannon, a first-generation Assyrian American, was born in Baghdad, Iraq, and grew up in Modesto. Marianne joined Stanislaus County Community Foundation as their CEO in late 2012. Stanislaus County Community Foundation is a place-based funder that provides grants and scholarships to community organizations in Stanislaus County. To date, the organization has invested nearly $19 million in local nonprofits and over $3 million in scholarships to students. Marianne was named one of 20 under 40 young civic leaders to watch by the Modesto Bee, Outstanding Woman for Stanislaus County, Distinguished Alumna of the Year for Modesto Junior College, Modesto Chamber of Commerce Distinguished Service Award. She is also an active Rotarian with Modesto Rotary Club, and she currently serves on the Board of Trustees for Doctors Medical Center. And now we begin our program with the Honorable Marie Silvera.
Hello, students, teachers, administrators, and other interested viewers. Welcome to our presentations today. I thank the American Heritage Scholarship Committee for their kind invitation to address you. My name is Marie Silvera, and I'm a retired judge, having served on the Superior Court for Stanislaus County for 22 years. Just so you know, a Superior Court judge is a trial judge who handles local cases for people in this county. Before I get into my remarks, I also want to say thank you to Marianne Cannon, who is my co-speaker today. She's done an outstanding job of talking to you about some very important considerations related to voting and citizenship in our county. And I also want to thank William Broderick Vija, who has helped tremendously with the presentation of the materials and some guidance to help me in my pursuit of trying to inform you about voting. Your essay prompt for 2020 is the following. Voting is a basic component of democracy, and who gets the right to cast a ballot has been a contentious issue. Today there's debate over lowering the age for voting. In honor of the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, consider the efforts made by generations of women to secure the right to vote. Use case law and statutes to support or oppose whether the voting age should be lowered. If so, to what age should it be lowered? If not, why? How do the arguments surrounding the 19th Amendment apply to these issues of teen voting? As you listen to my lecture and give serious thought to your essay, I hope you will realize the importance of the vote in this country, and in every democratic country for that matter. In the United States, voting could be considered a right of citizenship. It is also a privilege of citizenship and a responsibility of citizenship. When you think about the importance of a vote, you will have a better understanding of the history of our country and the issues that will face you, the young people of this community, in the future. Remember, voting is a right, a privilege, and a responsibility. A thoughtful understanding of voting can also include multiple subjects, and so I want to encourage you about this as you think about your essay and your future education. Connected to the issues of voting are the subjects of United States history, women's studies, African American history and studies, other ethnic studies, political science, constitutional law, and many more related topics. Perhaps one of these subjects is of special interest to you, and the essay that you write in connection with this program will spark your interest to learn even more. The starting point for me for this lecture is the Constitution of the United States, and I will try to bring to your attention some portions of the Constitution. As you listen to these provisions, please keep in mind that these documents were written in very different times and by people whose life experience was defined by their unique time in history. Think about this. What will be your time in history? What will be your challenges in history? And I'm going to have to be able to access my notes. I apologize for that. I'd rather just be looking at you and talking to you freely. But some of the information, especially from the Constitution, is quite technical, and so I'm going to be reading that as I go along. Please bear with me on that. The Constitution of the United States starts with a preamble. And the preamble is what we might otherwise call the introduction, or even a mission statement, if you're familiar with that term. A mission statement of the drafters of the Constitution. The preamble tells the reader of the Constitution what is important about this document. And here is what the preamble states. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessing of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. We the people is an expression that is familiar to all of us. When the Constitution was written, however, the we the people did not include everybody. Certainly it did not. It could, in fact, be said that it might have been written as follows. We, the white men of European heritage who own property, do hereby establish this Constitution. Native American people, African American people, brown and black people from the Caribbean, women of all races, colors, and creeds were not included in the preamble of the Constitution. As it was written, they were not included in the preamble, nor really in any part of the Constitution, and it never even was a consideration by the people who drafted this Constitution. So keep in mind the preamble to the Constitution and the main body of it was written in 1789. Over the course of many years, other events occurred in the United States that caused amendments to the Constitution. An amendment to the Constitution reflects a change or a clarification to the original document. The process by which the Constitution is actually amended is very complex. Any amendment to the Constitution first must be approved by 2/3 of the members of both houses of Congress, and later ratified or approved by 3/4 of all of the states in the United States. This is a tremendously challenging process, and it explains why, in fact, there are so few amendments to the Constitution. The 19th Amendment to the Constitution, that's part of your topic here and what is our celebration this year on the 100th anniversary, had its focus and its point giving women the right to vote. This amendment was enacted in 1920. That is 131 years after the Constitution was actually written. Women were actively working to have this amendment included in the Constitution for some 72 years. If you look at the history of this, there was the Constitution was created, 72 years passed, and then women started their first women's rights conference, and then another 72 years passed before, in fact, the 19th Amendment was ratified. So think about it. If we started working on an amendment today in 2020, and let me say, if you, the viewers of this presentation, start working on an amendment today in 2020, if that amendment took 72 years to ratify, that would be in the year 2092 that you would see an amendment to the Constitution on the principle that you would like to have changed. So here's what the 19th Amendment says. The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. The actual language of the amendment says that a citizen cannot be denied the right to vote based on sex. This amendment in 1920 was, of course, many years after the Founding Fathers created that preamble to the Constitution, "We the people." As a side note, let me also explain to you that individual states, such as California, New York, or all of the others, have their own separate constitutions. When I've been talking about the Constitution so far and the amendments and so forth, that's the United States Constitution. But each state also has its own constitution. These state constitutions frequently allowed women to participate in state and local elections much earlier than the 19th Amendment. In fact, voting in school board elections was considered an area of proper concern for women in some locations because women were allowed in some states and jurisdictions to care about their children, although it was not thought that they would care about the president. So there was a big distinction, but the men who had power over the vote said, okay, well, women can vote in school boards, but otherwise it might be too much for them to be voting in these other areas. In California, for example, the right to vote was extended to women in the year 1911. So even though women are able to vote in the state elections, they are not able to vote for the president or any federal offices until this 19th Amendment in 1920. And history is clear that well before the 19th Amendment, and well before women had this constitutional right to vote, they were serving our country in various positions, including educators, doctors, lawyers, nurses, and even elected officials. In fact, in Stanislaus County, a woman named Esther Broughton was born and raised in Modesto. She became one of the first lawyers in the state. She was one of 4 women elected to serve in the California Assembly in 1918. And so she was serving in the California Assembly, coming from the city of Modesto as a child and having her education locally. And she was elected to that office before she had the right to vote for president. So I know I've moved off track, but I wanted to tell you about a local person who succeeded in politics well before she had the right to vote for president. So let me go back to the Constitution. I've now discussed with you the Preamble and the 19th Amendment. There are 2 more provisions related to voting that I would like to reference for your purposes of considering your essay. The United States Constitution was amended after the Civil War to include 3 amendments: the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendments, known collectively as the Reconstruction Amendments. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery and involuntary servitude, except as that would be considered as punishment for a crime. The 14th Amendment further provided that all persons who were born or naturalized in the United States are citizens, and that no state could make any law to abridge the rights of citizens. This amendment also provided for due process of law and equal protection. And the text of the 14th Amendment says as follows. I'm going to read it to you. It's included in your materials, of course. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or abridge any law which shall no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or the immunities of citizens of the United States. Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of law. Section 2 of the 14th Amendment is technical. So in terms of me reading it to you, I think you're going to prefer to read it for yourself. It was a system that allowed for the counting of people so that representatives could be determined where that was essential to Congress. But one of the things in that Section 2 of the 14th Amendment, there was a specific provision that the voting rights applied to the male inhabitants of each state. And when this was enacted, it was quite controversial in some fashion, because there were women who had been fighting for the right to have a vote, and they were hoping that in these Reconstruction amendments, in fact, it would say the vote would be extended to all citizens, all inhabitants, male or female, or would just not have the word male, so that it could be considered to apply to everyone. Instead, the way that the 14th Amendment second section is drafted, it relates to calculating the number of male inhabitants so that representative governments could be determined. The 15th Amendment was also part of the post-Civil War Reconstruction, and it prohibited federal and state governments from denying a citizen the right to vote based upon the citizen's race, color, or previous condition of servitude. The 15th Amendment says, the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. That was ratified, along with these others, in 1870. So again, this is consideration of amendments that have extended the right to vote to individuals who are living in the United States, because these three provisions, the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendment, apply to the freed slaves at the conclusion of the Civil War. They do not still apply to women. There still is the category of women who, of course, are half of the country, or perhaps more than half of the country, that are denied the right to vote based upon the way that these were drafted and then also later on interpreted in Supreme Court cases. Just one more section of the Constitution. I know you're thinking, this is a lot, Judge, what are you talking about? But for your considerations related to your essay, there is also the 26th Amendment to the Constitution. The 26th Amendment reduced the voting age from age 21 to age 18. It's the text of the 26th Amendment says the right of citizens of the United States who are 18 years of age or older to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of age. Keep in mind that all of these amendments are developments of their own time. In particular, this 26th Amendment was enacted because young men were fighting in Vietnam in that war, but yet they had no right to vote for president because they were not yet 21. That cried out for a change, and so the 26th Amendment was enacted. Just like the Reconstruction amendments were added following the Civil War, and then ultimately you'll see the 19th Amendment had its own time, and that's what we're celebrating from 100 years ago. So ask yourself, are there issues right now that affect us, that affect you as younger people, that cry out for an extension of the right to vote? For example, is climate change an issue that critically impacts the youngest members of our nation? Is that the kind of issue that would be unique to you and to this time? Is there something else that's on your mind now that you think if teens and younger people had a right to vote, it would be critically important to them because it makes a difference in their lives, and so the Constitution should be appropriately changed? So, I know this has been a lot of information, but now you have some basic and fundamental constitutional law. The Preamble, the 13th through the 15th Reconstruction Amendments, the 19th Amendment for the women's right to vote, and the 26th Amendment for the right to vote at age 18. And because of your essay topic that asks you to consider certain of the issues related to the 19th Amendment, and because we're celebrating the 100th anniversary of that, I'd like to share some additional history for you to consider. The term suffrage, perhaps you've heard of this, I'm sure you have, is sometimes also referred to as active suffrage. That means the right to vote. Women who advocated for women's right to vote were known as suffragettes. This political movement had its start in July 1848, when a group of women announced and later held a women's rights convention in Seneca Falls, New York. This is what's known as the beginning of the women's rights movement for purposes of the 19th Amendment. These women set an agenda for the recognition of women's rights, and it was based on the principles that were stated in the Declaration of Independence. And if you remember, the Declaration of Independence says all men are created equal. Well, at the Women's Rights Convention, they wanted the declaration, or their declaration, to say that all persons, all men and all women, are created equal. And from that point, their movement grew. Holding a women's convention or a conference was not an easy task in 1848. I wanted you to keep that in mind as you think about the struggles that it took in order to enact this amendment. Women traveled long distances by horse-drawn carriages and with great hardships. Most women needed to have supportive husbands, or they would not have been permitted to leave their home duties. The early organizing for women's rights was done on a state-by-state basis, and that was primarily in the northern states, done by women who had very strong beliefs about freedom, the principle of freedom. These included Quaker women who fought for religious freedoms, other women who were abolitionists. There was a very strong emphasis of women who were opposed to slavery and worked towards to have slavery abolished in the Civil War. There were other women in the women's rights movements who basically objected to the view that was held in the 1800s that women were the property of their husbands. The progress of the suffrage movement was sometimes put on hold, so to speak. So, for example, during the Civil War, when the country was at the brink of a division, women primarily worked to support the war efforts to abolish slavery. In fact, there was conflict because, as I mentioned, when the Civil War ended and the Reconstruction Amendments to the Constitution were enacted, there were many women who were abolitionists and also advocates of women's rights who wanted to have the 14th Amendment read so that it was gender neutral, so to speak, that it didn't have that reference to the male inhabitants. But at the time, the politics of that, and if you're interested in learning more, this is a very fascinating area to study, but at that time, the white men who had the votes found that giving freed black slaves additional rights was to them almost more than they could bear. And so the idea that they would also extend votes to women was just not acceptable by any stretch. So I think you'll find this whole area to be a fascinating time, issues of women's rights and women's history, if you choose to follow it. Let me give you two more thoughts about the suffragettes. So these suffragettes, moving forward to about the early 1900s, there's of course much more political communication and action that's happening at that time. Some of the suffragettes suffered greatly to bring about the change that happened when they finally got to have the amendment ratified. By the year 1912, California had given the women the right to vote in the state constitution, and many other western states had also given women the right to vote in state elections. There were approximately 4 million women who had the right to vote in state elections. Still, they could not vote for president. Ultimately, there was significant protesting, tremendous protesting, in fact, and these included marches on the White House, the burning of protest fires in the streets, and so forth. It was considered unladylike, you've heard that term, unladylike, to be arrested at a protest, but the suffragettes, in fact, took great pride in their rebellion. The consequence of an arrest for a public disturbance or for other similar offense was a small fine. It could have been easily paid. The women who were suffragettes typically had money, and they had some money that had been raised to support their cause. The protesting suffragettes, though, considered that their actions were political protests. They had a political voice and a point to be made, and they refused to pay these fines of $5. So instead, they were jailed. And in fact, the jails for the women suffragettes were chosen to be the worst jails that in fact that were in such poor condition they had been closed, and men could not even be kept there any longer. They were jailed in facilities that were rat and cockroach infested. Jailed women ended up going on hunger strikes because the conditions were so poor. And when they were on hunger strikes, the law enforcement that was responsible for their housing at the jail, in fact, did force feeding of them, stuffing down their throats raw eggs and other kinds of food that caused the women to vomit, in fact, caused some great injury to some of these suffragettes who were protesting for their right to vote. If they weren't on a complete hunger strike, the food that was given to them was in fact moldy and bad food. Everything was done so that somehow they would be convinced to give this up. Back off of this campaign to get the vote. Go back home, be a wife and a mother, and stop this campaign. So it was really only when it appeared that some of these women might die in the course of their protests, especially in the hunger strikes, that the national tide began to turn in their favor. So during the early 1900s, we now appreciate even more because of our COVID circumstances that the world was suffering from the Spanish flu epidemic and the consequences of World War I. So after these events, and in light of the strong will of the protesters, finally, the 19th Amendment was ratified by Congress. It was approved by the United States House of Representatives in May of 1919 and by the U.S. Senate in June of 1919. And if you remember back, remember that I told you that there was also a need for state ratification. So that is critical to this, because if the states who didn't approve it, the amendment would fail. Still, it could fail. So by August 1920, all the states had decided for or against the 19th Amendment, except for the state of Tennessee. It was the last state. The amendment was doomed to failure if it was not ratified in the state of Tennessee. The Tennessee legislature voted, and it appeared that the legislature was evenly split. And you'll see, I think we've got some information showing all of these terrible things. They were telling some people, men, if you vote for this, you know, you'll be henpecked and this is terrible, and I think you're showing some of this. Can anybody terrorize Tennessee manhood? Like, don't let these women get away with this idea of getting the vote. Anyway, the Tennessee legislature voted. It appeared that this legislature was evenly split, that it was 50-50. And if there was a tie vote, that would cause the 19th Amendment to fail, because a tie is not a ratification. A tie will not win the day. So in the final moment, a young representative by the name of Harry Byrne, he changed his vote. He asked to change it from a nay to a yay on the amendment. And when that happened, the 19th Amendment became ratified. People accused this young man of, in fact, having been bribed to do it for these women who would, you know, go to every cost or no cost could be too much for them to try to get this. And here's what he said. I changed my vote in favor of ratification because I believe in full suffrage as a right. I believe we had a moral and legal right to ratify. I know that a mother's advice is always safest for her boy to follow, and my mother wanted me to vote for ratification. And so the mother had told her son, send him a letter, because of course, keep in mind, nobody has a cell phone, there's not a text message. She wrote her darling son a letter, and she said, Harry, when this comes up, you need to support this. And I didn't write down the exact quote, but it's something like, get the rats out of ratification or something. And I think the rats that she was referring to were the people who are against it. Anyway, that final vote was 72 years after the Seneca Falls Women's Rights Convention, the very first time that the women got together. It took 72 years. So in addition to this constitutional history, let me just tell you a couple of cases. I know you need some of these materials for purposes of writing your essay, and I do appreciate your patience. I'll also tell you a little bit about some of the suffragettes. The United States Supreme Court decided two pivotal issues related to women's issues in the cases in the 1800s. Keep in mind, if you go back, you'll look at what we talked about in terms of citizens and people having the right to vote and so forth, and how the Supreme Court, in fact, ignored some of that. In Bradwell versus the state of Illinois, an 1873 case, it's referenced in the PowerPoint and in your materials, and in the case of Minor versus Happersett, an 1875 case. Remember, by the time these cases are being heard by the United States Supreme Court, women have been fighting for the vote already for 25 years. Women have already been advancing their educations. They've been communicating, writing, having speeches, doing everything that they can to show that they should be treated equally. In the Bradwell case, Miss Amira Bradwell was denied the license to practice law in the state of Illinois after she successfully studied for and passed the bar examination for that state. In denying her the license that she needed to work as a lawyer, the state of Illinois had said that the job of a lawyer would destroy her femininity and that it would be improper because she, as a woman, was not a separate person from her husband. The United States Supreme Court agreed that with this denial of her right to work, saying that the female sex was too delicate to work, other than to serve the destiny of being a wife and a mother. Instead of relying on the provisions of the Constitution to analyze this issue, as they should have, the United States Supreme Court said this was the law of the Creator, that the women were too delicate. In the other case, the Minor case, Mrs. Virginia Minor attempted to register to vote in Missouri, but the registrar of voters refused to accept her application. Mrs. Minor sued the registrar with the help of her husband, who was, in fact, a lawyer. Her position was that voting was a right of citizenship. The Supreme Court rejected that position, finding that, yes, she was a citizen of the United States, but the Constitution did not give the right to vote to women. regardless of their citizenship. And so before I conclude, I'd just like to take a few more minutes to address some heroines of the suffragette movement. And if you're interested in learning more, I encourage you to do some additional reading on this. One of the most famous women in the suffragette movement was Susan B. Anthony. You've heard her name, and in fact, her face is on a coin, so she's well known. Miss Anthony was a school teacher who attended her first women's conference in 1853, and she became immediately devoted to the cause of women. Prior to this convention, Miss Anthony had gone to she was a school teacher, she had gone to a teacher's conference, and she objected because she learned that her pay was less than the male teachers. And she was booed at the teachers' conference for trying to stand up for equal pay back in the 1800s. She realized this inequality, and she fought the rest of her life for causes for women. Susan Anthony and Elizabeth Stanton became acquainted through their work for women's rights. Mrs. Stanton called herself the thinker in terms of creating strategies for protests and so forth. And that Miss Anthony was all about the action for the protests. Mrs. Stanton said that she forged the thunderbolts of protest and that Miss Anthony fired them. So that's quite a vivid image, really, for two school teachers in the 1800s, leading decades and generations of protesting women. So here's one more story about Miss Anthony. In 1872, again, after the free slaves were allowed to vote, but women were not, Miss Anthony tried to vote in a federal election for president. The U.S. Marshals arrested her, and her case gained significant publicity. Susan B. Anthony demanded to be handcuffed when she was arrested. And of course, handcuffing a woman was unladylike and highly unusual, and she preferred to stay in jail after her arrest because she wanted more publicity for her cause. But her bail was paid by her lawyer and she was released. So as soon as she got released, she started a national tour giving speeches. And the subject of her speech was, "Is it a crime for a U.S. citizen to vote?" Ultimately, she had a trial, which for all intents and purposes, unfortunately, was a sham when it was held. The judge, after hearing the evidence, ordered all the men of the jury to find her guilty. And then, after they came back, he discharged the jury immediately, so there was no opportunity to object to the guilty verdict. When she was sentenced, she gave a speech saying that all of her rights and all of the rights of everyone of her sex had been trampled on by the so-called government. This infuriated the judge. She was ultimately ordered to pay a fine of $100, but Susan Anthony never paid the fine. She never served another day of jail on that. They just wanted her to go away. Another person who was a well-known historical suffragette is a lady named Alice Paul, and she was the leader of the protests that led to the hunger strikes. In addition to these hunger strikes, Miss Paul was frequently imprisoned, and this is for this political protest for the right to vote. She was imprisoned in solitary confinement. She was tortured by police and other authorities, and ultimately there were attempts to have doctors declare that she was mentally ill, so that in fact she would be committed to an insane asylum to remove her from the suffragette leadership. Those efforts were unsuccessful, thankfully. The doctors would not declare that in fact she was insane. I think they declared that she was committed to her cause. It should also be mentioned that black women and other women of color from different backgrounds were significant suffragettes. There's a lot of history to this if you're interested. One woman, Sojourner Truth, was a freed slave. She had been a slave, she grew up as a slave, and she ultimately was freed. She fought to have her children removed from slavery and returned to her, and she fought for women's rights, the right to vote. She has a very famous speech, and it's called "Ain't I a Woman?" And she talks about the rights of working women. She talks about the rights of women who had been enslaved been enslaved, and you might want to read this and see how that impacts your thinking. So now that you've learned more about the Constitution, let me just tell you, well, let me wrap this up. Now that you've learned more about the Constitution and the historical background of the suffragettes, what do you think about your challenge to address lowering the voting age? Are there compelling reasons to give citizens the right when they are not yet age 18? What obligations do minors already have under the laws of this state and country? Are young people legally qualified to work? Do they pay taxes? Do they pay fees for license, like a driver's license or some other kind of license? Are minors subject to the whole array of criminal and civil laws? Can a minor be arrested? If a teenage girl has a baby, do both of the young parents have legal responsibilities? These are the kinds of questions you might want to ask yourself as you consider what are young people's interests in voting. And on the other hand, do teen voters lack life experience to understand the issues that might arise in a presidential election? Would teen voters understand their voting responsibilities, or do you think they might prank an election with their votes or act irresponsibly? What do you think about those considerations? So please remember that this campaign to gain suffrage for women started in 1848, and the amendment passed in 1920. There was only one woman who, at the age of 19, signed the Declaration of Women's Rights at Seneca Falls, and she was alive when the 19th Amendment passed. Her name is Charlotte Woodard Pierce. She was 92 years old, and she had spent her entire life working for suffrage. How long would you work to change the Constitution for youth voting? In closing, I thank you for your attention and for your interest in this important essay program. There are many more materials, especially online, that can help you with your research. American history and your vote is a critical part of our individual heritage. Remember, a right, a privilege, and a responsibility. Thank you.
My name is Marianne Cannon. I'm the president and CEO of Stanislaus Community Foundation. I want to thank Judge Silvera for giving us such a thorough background on the history of voting rights and the suffrage movement and why voting matters. And what I'd like to do with all of you is explain the role of civic engagement and civic leadership and why it matters, both in my role as CEO of the Stanislaus Community Foundation, in my personal life as someone that was a refugee and an immigrant to this country and that came from a country where voting rights were certainly not guaranteed and in fact were bitterly fought over, and also what it means to be a civic citizen of our democracy today, which I know is on the minds of many people in this country in 2020 United States. So again, I'm Marianne Cannon. I'm the CEO of Stanislaus Community Foundation. What is Stanislaus Community Foundation? We are a 501c3, a nonprofit, a philanthropic institution serving Stanislaus County. Unlike other nonprofits, we actually are engaged in leadership work, and we're a funder to other nonprofits. We give out about $2 to $3 million a year, and since our inception, we've given out $22 million in grants and scholarships to high school students like you that are headed to college. We house over 160 charitable funds and close to $40 million in assets under management. But that's sort of what I would call the transactional side of the house. What the Community Foundation really is and is becoming is a leadership organization, really committed to the long-term view on our community and to taking a nuanced approach to the vexing issues that impact communities like ours. But before I tell you a little bit about the leadership work of the Community Foundation, I want to tell you about my own personal story. So I mentioned I'm an immigrant to this country. I was actually born in Baghdad, Iraq. I am Assyrian, and my family left when I was 5 when Saddam Hussein came into power, and they left both for religious reasons but also for political ones. It was becoming increasingly difficult for minority communities in Iraq to really exercise their freedom of religion and certainly their freedom of voice. So we left when I was 5, and we hopscotched around Europe and Greece, and we eventually ended up in Canada until I was 15. And then we moved from Canada to Modesto when I was 15, and I am a proud graduate of Bayer High School, go Patriots, and then I went to MJC, where I was student body vice president, and then UC Davis. So to me, because of my nomadic early existence, the closest thing I have to a home and a hometown is Modesto. And I love our community. Does our community have problems? Absolutely. Like any other community in the country, I think we are at a tipping point and a transitional point. And I think that's why having a voice and having a vote is so critical. But really, my early years impressed upon me the real need to advocate for both myself, my parents, families like ours, and really those living on the margins of our economy, of our communities. That includes refugees, immigrants, migrant workers, folks that fall outside sort of standard issue, or what would be considered standard issue, sort of Americanism, if you will. And so I really have taken my early years and transitioned into a lifetime of advocacy work, first working for nonprofits and now as CEO of the Community Foundation. In terms of the Community Foundation and our civic leadership work and why it matters, we believe at Stanislaus Community Foundation, our highest vision actually, is that Stanislaus County is a community of choice where people choose to live, work, and thrive. That's what we say. It's in all of our materials. If you were to go to our website, you would see that as our vision statement. That vision is actually nuanced in the sense that it's twofold. When we say Stanislaus County is a community of choice, what we mean by that first is that no one's here by default. No one's here because they got priced out of another housing market. No one's here because they can't afford to live anywhere else. And yet what we often think of when we think of the Central Valley is we're sort of the receptacle for the coastal communities of California. And I think that's increasingly a false narrative. I think the quality of life in the Central Valley is fast outpacing the quality of life in the coastal communities of California. So this idea of us being a community of choice means no one's here by accident. The second nuance to that vision of Stanislaus County, that we're a community of choice, is that we have choices. You have choices. We have choices about the jobs we want to have, the training we have, the houses we live in, the schools our kids go to. So it really has taken on an even richer meaning for the Community Foundation to hold on to that vision. And I will tell you, since the early days of this pandemic and since all the racial unrest that's occurred over the summer, I have struggled to hold on to that vision. And my civic faith has been somewhat shaken in the last few months. That doesn't mean it's totally obliterated, but it has been shaken. I think in this country we are at a decision point in our democracy around what kind of country we want to be. And how do we, as I mentioned in my own advocacy work, move people from the margins of our country and our economies and our communities into the center of our countries and our economies and communities. So that's where voting comes in. That's where participating as a civic citizen comes in. So I think asking yourself, as you have listened to Judge Silvera, as you begin your response to the prompt and think about this essay, the idea of being a civic citizen in 2020 America, what might that look like for you? I can tell you for the Community Foundation, and for me personally, it looks like this. I serve on the Governor's Complete Count Census Committee. It's the committee that is administering the census for the state of California. I also started a few years ago a leadership program at the Community Foundation with my peers called the Irvine New Leadership Network, taking emerging leaders and equipping them with really cutting-edge social innovation tools. And we really, in the last few years, have also focused on bringing leaders together and looking at systemic issues in our community beyond just services and programs, but at root causes around poverty, educational attainment, and civic engagement. So we also now at the Community Foundation fund 2 full-time reporters at the Modesto Bee. I can tell you part of, I think, the harm that's being done in our democracy is it's not that lies are widespread right now, but that people don't know what to believe anymore. So it's not, we're a nation of cynics. And I think the way to combat cynicism is to exercise your civic leadership and your civic engagement as a civic citizen. So we fund 2 full-time reporters because we think community journalism is sorely needed in media deserts like Modesto and Stanislaus County. We also recently nominated, and she was accepted, one of our employees to join Citizen University. I highly encourage you to check out that program. It's based out of Seattle. They have what's called civic seminaries and civic Saturdays. And what I love about their program is they base it on the idea that if the world's oldest religions have survived annihilation attempts and all sorts of warfare, certainly our citizen identity, our civic identity can withstand the pressures on it at this time. And so they've modeled their civic seminaries and their civic Saturdays almost as religious experiences. So I'm really excited to bring that program through this fellowship that my staff members participating in to Stanislaus County in 2021. So watch for that. Very excited about that. We're also helping support a teacher at Davis High, Ronaldo Rucker, with the Black Student Union Network and supporting his work, his incredible work with local Black student leaders and the NAACP Youth Council. So we have a lot going on at the Community Foundation, really again around this idea of how do we increase civic literacy. And I can tell you, for you, some ideas, some suggestions I may have are obviously voting. Voting is important, and voting with an informed choice, doing the work to educate yourselves about ballot initiatives and about candidates, and not necessarily educating yourself by going just on social media, but really looking at what even different journalistic outlets are saying, but really taking the time to research why you believe what you believe and why you want to cast your vote the way you do. I think filling out the census, encouraging your family to fill out the census. If you haven't already done that, this is the year to do that. You can also volunteer for nonprofits. At the Community Foundation, the other thing we're forming in 2021 is a youth leadership board council where we're going to ask youth to step up and serve 1-year terms on nonprofit boards, and we're hoping to raise funds to stipend some of you to serve on those nonprofit boards. Again, so that you gain a sense of how this community runs and what makes it work. So volunteer for the organizations you care about. Cast a vote when you're at the appropriate age. Fill out your census forms. There are all sorts of commissions you can sit on. There are meetings you can attend just to listen in. I think for too long in a community like this, we've mistaken power with authority. The people that sit at the dais and cast votes, the elected officials, they have authority over budgets, they have authority over personnel, they have authority over how bills are interpreted and implemented in this county and in the cities, but they don't necessarily have power. We've mistaken those two things for too long. You have power. I have power. The average resident has power. I think we have to wake up to that in 2020 America. And when we do, anything is possible. I really want to encourage you to remember that. And even when it's getting dark, and again, my civic faith has been fairly shaken, I think when I remember who has power and how we can begin to harness it, I begin to think that our better days maybe are still ahead of us. And that definitely keeps me going. So learn about issues, ask good questions, engage in civil dialogue and debate with your peers and your parents and your friends. Do the research and absolutely be prepared to be a citizen of this democracy and to take it forward. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Brian Clark, editor of the Modesto Bee, and welcome. The American Heritage Scholarship Program was created after 9/11 to support the community in increasing the understanding of what it means to be an American. The program was the brainchild of former opinions editor Dick LeGrand, who retired in 2003. Mr. LeGrand was a top-notch journalist who was looking for a way to enlighten teens, and really everyone, to understand what it means to be an American and the importance the Constitution plays on everyday life. Through the years, the program has been supported by former Bee Opinions editors Judy Sly and Mike Dunbar, and our current opinions editor Garth Stapley, who was a volunteer for this committee. The topic on voting age is a great one. All of you are right in the middle of it right now, and I'm sure you have varying opinions. The judges will want to read strong arguments, be led smoothly through your points, and in the end, be sold on the idea that voting age should either be lower or stay the same. They'll also want to be left with something to remember and remember that. So how do you shape your opinions into a convincing essay? One that may sway one person all the way to the other side or just simply to the other side? Here's some quick words of advice. Before you define the direction you'll take, do some research and do a lot more research. Look for numerous sources and the many sides of the arguments. Maybe it's looking at the impacts of lowering the age in other countries and how they came to that decision. Read about the US states that have lowered the age or failed to lower the age and what happened in their attempts to do so. Great essays come from great research. Number 2, decide on the direction you want to take and own it. The best opinions and arguments come from the heart. It's that character in your writing that will help you bond with your audience. Number 3, write an outline. Find 3 to 5 elements you may want to introduce. What case law, amendments, statutes do you want to incorporate? Remember to start strong, but finish stronger. The middle of the essay should be there to support your points. If you're organized in your approach, the essay should flow smoothly. And make sure you polish those transitions between each segment. You want your readers to glide through every sentence, paragraph, and your entire body of work. In your opening, you can take several roads. You can go right into the Constitution. You can cite the words and works of historical figures like Thomas Jefferson or Susan B. Anthony. You can even try to link today's culture to the topic. Just a couple of years ago, the winner linked the legalization of marijuana to the play Hamilton. Whatever your approach, weave that theme throughout the essay to build and strengthen your case. Support your arguments with data, case law, and other facts. If there's a place to apply the 19th Amendment or any other part of the Constitution, do so. In addition to reinforcing your points, spend a little time acknowledging the other side in a reverential tone while demonstrating how your argument is a stronger one. That will lend credence and balance to your essay. On case law and data, don't go too deep into the weeds. Make your supporting information understandable, complementary, but not overwhelming. And for your conclusion, draw on your main points and sell them. This is your time to make your case. If you can reference something in your opening, that's a great way to tie a bow on all the great work. Look for ways to stand out from everyone else. And finally, a couple of housekeeping items. Check for spelling, punctuation, grammar, and syntax. Use the thesaurus judiciously and edit yourself. Make every word count. Have someone read it and be open to criticism. If you have to rewrite parts of your story or all of your story, do so. If it reads long, it probably is too long. Poke holes in your argument. Anticipate the questions you might get from someone on the other side and make sure you can answer that question. Be your biggest critic. And finally, have fun. That you're here, that you're entering this contest is a testament to where you are in your academic life. You should be proud to be participating. And with that, I would like to thank the American Heritage Essay Committee members for their hard work and dedication to this program. The committee consists of Lisa Avila from the Stanislaus County Office of Education, William Broderick Villa of Broderick Legal Group, Cheryl Goulart, Jason Maggart, and Christine Sisko from SCOE, Garth Stapley with the Modesto Bee, and Janine Zambo with Modesto City Schools. Thank you and good luck.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Brad Godot. I'm the Associate Superintendent of Educational Services with Modesto City Schools, and it's my pleasure to be here this evening. I'd like to start by thanking our presenters for their time and support for this program, as well as our students, teachers, parents, and community members for viewing this presentation and participating in this valuable event. To the students preparing to write their scholarship essays, I would like to highlight some information to you. In past years, many essays have been disqualified for a number of reasons, and so we want to review those reasons now so that you don't make the same mistakes. First of all, make sure that you quote and cite all sources in your essay, and be sure to underline these. One of your sources must be a quote or a comment from tonight's speakers. Those speakers' names are listed in the program and in the application packet. In addition to your comments from the speaker, make sure you have 3 additional Supreme Court decisions and or scholarly resources cited. Wikipedia does not count. You need to have a total of 4 required sources, all of which should be listed on a Works Cited page. Be sure to check all of the guidelines in the packet available on the SCOE website. Essays are due to the County Office of Education by 4:30 p.m. on October 12th, hand-delivered or U.S. mail postmarked. For more relevant and important information, please visit the American Heritage website. This includes the 2020 application packets. Just click on the Related Links tab. And note that the scholarship essay cover sheet must be completed on the website. And I believe that the website link is referenced on this slide. After completing and submitting your contact information, your completed form will be emailed to you in a PDF. Please print out the cover sheet and sign it along with your parent. Please paper clip on top of your unnamed essay. Remember, the essay must not have your name on it. Additional resources are available that will help you in writing the essay, including the essay rubric. Always important when you're writing an essay is to know what the requirements and expected components are, as well as a web tutorial on writing, which was produced by the Modesto Bee. In addition, just a number of things or comments around our scholarship winners have attended some of the most well-known colleges and universities, including the University of Southern California, Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, CSU Chico, Monterey Bay, Harvard, Stanford, Northwest, and my favorite, of course, St. Mary's College. Go Gales. And before we close, I'd like to thank Renee Guevara and the awesome Downey videography team who's putting this together for their countless hours and amazing work. I say great job and thank you very much. If you have questions related to the American Heritage Essay Scholarship Contest, please contact Lisa Avila, and you can find her email address on the American Heritage website. And finally, I just want to thank you again for viewing this presentation and supporting this distinguished scholarship program. I've had the honor and the pleasure of being involved and supporting the program on behalf of Dr. Noguchi, our superintendent, and Modesto City Schools, as well as all of the other County Office of Ed and supporting districts and companies. What a great group of talented young students participating, and I wish you all the best and a successful outcome. Thank you.